Now obviously a NAS wouldn't really be much of a NAS if we weren't using it for file sharing. And fortunately, TrueNAS, which is an open source NAS solution, does actually support quite a few different file sharing protocols. But the more common one used for Linux computers, Windows computers, Mac OS computers is known as Windows Shares, SMB, Samba. It has quite a few different names, but ultimately, out of the box, all those different operating systems can connect to a NAS that's using that file sharing protocol to get access to data that's actually stored on the actual NAS, or to upload the data as well. But how do you configure TrueNAS to support this file sharing protocol? How do you actually secure it so that only certain users or groups of users can get access, or only certain types of access, such as write access or read access? Well, if that's something you're interested in learning, then stick around and watch this video, because that's what we'll be going over. Now, as you can see, we're logged into our TrueNAS server, and this is a server that I built in a previous video. So if you're not familiar with how to actually install and configure TrueNAS, then by all means pause this video, go and check the other one first, and then come back to this one to see where we pick up from. Now, when it comes to Windows shares, what we're doing is sharing data out over the network, but we want to restrict who gets access to what. In other words, we want to be able to identify the actual user themselves to decide if they'll be able to get access to some data, in which case we need user accounts. But the problem is, especially if you're working in a large company, it's not practical to be assigning rights to individual users. It starts getting out of hand. There's too much admin work involved, especially if users start moving to different departments, for example. So let's say we set up a series of folders and share them out to the individual users. Now, if one user then moves department, it's a case of they've got access to shares they shouldn't have access to, so that needs to be taken away. So we have to go through all of those shares that are being used and take them out of those shares that are not supposed to get access to. But we also have to identify which shares they now need access to and add them to those. So it's not really practical. So for that reason, as a general rule of thumb, the idea is you actually create your users, but you also create groups. And then you assign access to the actual shares to the groups. So for example, let's say we've got an HR department. All of the HR people are assigned into that HR group. And then if we've got an HR folder, or rather a folder that needs access by the HR team, we assign access to that folder to the HR group. And the good thing about that is, well, let's say, for example, we get a new user turns up. All we've got to do is add them to the relevant groups. If a person decides to, or for whatever reason moves to a different department within the company, we go into their user account, we take them out of the groups that they no longer belong to, and add them to the actual groups they need to belong to in order to get access to what they are. And it's easy to identify because you just look at somebody else doing the same job, basically. So the whole system is a lot easier using groups. So from a Windows file server perspective, this is actually pretty easy to do because you just go into the shares system, share out your folder, and you just set up the shares specifically for a group. For example, users just don't come into it. The only problem is with an operating system like FreeBSD, well, that's slightly different because the actual file system sharing process is based on a user permission, a group permission, and an actual other permission. So we actually have to have a user who's assigned as being the owner, if you will, and we need as well as a group. So we can't just assign it to a group, for example, and say this group has got permission. Somewhere we have to have this user account that's also got permission. So it is a different sort of system, I must admit. Now, it is tempting to actually create the users first, then all the groups, then you set up the shares and you assign the permissions to the actual groups. But the trouble is there's a special share that exists within this Windows share system, which is known as a home share. The idea is that you can actually have individual users assigned to a home directory. So when they connect to the network, there's an actual network share that's specifically for them, so they can upload and download files to the NAS. And that makes a lot of sense, especially in a small business or a large business, even at home, for example, because most computers, well, they've only got one hard drive, and if that hard drive breaks, chances are you are going to lose some data. it may well be you just can't recover all of it. Now a NAS is a lot more robust. It depends on how you've set it up, but the expectation is it should be able to survive at least one hard drive failure. It should be getting backed up to another on-site storage, maybe a USB drive plugged into the back of the computer, maybe another NAS that's in the building, but it should also be getting backed up to the cloud, and that whole process is automated. In contrast, somebody comes into the office, for example, they're only there for a certain amount of time, so the computer gets turned on and gets turned off at night, or at least it should be if you want to save energy. So in which case, it's harder to back up a computer like that. So not surprisingly, it's quite common where you'd be expecting people to actually put their data on the actual NAS, on this home directory, for example. Leave your data there, and you're not really going to notice any latency difference as such when you're working on a file that's on a NAS versus one that's on your local computer. But it just makes life a whole lot easier. I mean, if you want to upgrade the computer, for example, and it goes wrong, or the computer breaks, well, all your data is still there on the NAS. So it does make life a lot easier having those folders, but the trouble is, well, it's a case of the way the system works is you've got to have that in place before you actually start setting up your accounts. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back through all of those accounts you've created and then assigning them to the actual home directory later on. So yeah, it's a bit of an oddball, I must admit, in this case. So the first thing we actually need to do is to create an actual user account. Because of just the way that this FreeBSD works, we've got to assign some user to be able to have access to this share. But it's a special share where we don't really expect anybody to be getting access to it. We don't really want people putting data in it. It's a case of the system's going to set up new folders, one that's unique to every individual within this share, and they alone will get access to that folder. So it keeps everything nice and private for the individual users, but it gives them somewhere to share, to store their data. But like I say, we still need a user to be able to create that folder, if you will, in the first place to then share it out. Now, for whatever reason, TrueNAS will only let you log into this, this web page, if you will, to manage TrueNAS as the root. As a rule of thumb, you should not be logging in as a root account. You should just stay away from it. It's a super user account. It's the account that can do everything. As a rule of thumb, we don't want to use it, but for whatever reason, TrueNAS forces you to. You don't have much choice here if you're going to come in through the GUI. You've got to log in as the root user. And the problem is that root user also belongs to the wheel account, the wheel group, I should say. And that wheel group is what allocates who gets access to, like, the switch user option, for example, to get elevated privileges, who gets remote login rights, and so on. So we don't want to be using either. We don't want to be assigning this folder to the root user in the wheel. You want to stay away from those as well. So yeah, it's a bit tricky in the sense that by default we're going to be assigning permissions to root and wheel simply because we're logged in as root. So we need a kind of a placeholder user, if you will, an actual user account that we can use as a kind of a band-aid, if you will, just to get around the way that TrueNAS or FreeBSD in this case is actually working in terms of file permissions. Now, when it comes to creating user accounts, I'm talking about user accounts that are local to this TrueNAS server. I'm not talking about directory services. I mean, TrueNAS can tap into Active Directory and LDAP, for example. But what we're referring to here is just a local database of user accounts that exist on TrueNAS itself. So the idea is that when somebody logs in, TrueNAS goes and looks in its database to find out, does this user exist? Are they supplying the right password? That's the sort of user account we're talking about. So easy enough to set up. We click on accounts to expand out our options, then click on users. Then we go over to the add option to create a new user. And then what we need to do is give it a name. So because to me this is just a placeholder, there's nobody expected to be logging in with this actual user account. I don't expect anybody to be using it to get access to anything. It's just literally a placeholder so I can get this special share set up. So once I've filled in the actual full name and click here, what it's going to do is come up with a username based on whatever I've typed in here. Now you can actually expand out on this. It's actually consolidated down. It's truncated it down, I should say. yeah, down to 8 characters. So if you click on the question mark, it says you can have up to 16. It gives you details of what you can, but it's just warning you if there's any legacy systems that you've got out there, they might only be able to support 8 characters for the username. So it's something you need to bear in mind. So I could certainly put in a user account here and call it, say, placeholder, just to keep those two in line. But it's just something you need to bear in mind. Anyhow, even though this is a placeholder, well, there's our little warning there, but we can still carry on. Even though this is just a placeholder and the expectation is it'll never get access to anything, there's really no such a thing as never. You never know. That's the point. There's always the potential this user account could suddenly get used against you. You just literally don't know. So I'm still going to give it a password, but you should really be putting in a much stronger password that I'm using. In my case, I'm just doing this for the sake of for a demo. Saves having to type extremely long, complicated passwords and leave you sitting around while I do that. Now, for this particular user account, or the FreeBSD system, Linux, Unix, that sort of stuff, what it tends to do is that when you create a user, that user gets an equivalent group created for it. So I'm going to create a user account called placeholder, and the system, as you can see, it's got a little tick box thing, new primary group. It's actually then going to create a group called placeholder. The reason for that, it's to do with the way it does its permissions. Now, at the moment, you can see that this home folder is pointing to non-existent. There is no actual home folder. So it's just pointing to a special folder, if you will, called non-existent. So these actual permissions don't apply to anything, really, because there is no home folder. But I just want to demonstrate the fact that if we go back up to here, we've got a user account up here, which has got a user and name. Now, if somebody logs into a system like this, and they actually create a file on a share, whether it's in a folder or a share over the network, the system actually has to then assign permissions to that file or folder. And it's going to do it like this, where it's going to look at the username that was used to create the actual object. And they're going to get a series of permissions. It's then going to look and see where's that user's primary group. And it's going to assign permissions to that primary group. And then it's going to assign permissions to other, meaning everybody else. So when we're looking at these permissions, it's referencing a non-existent home folder or home directory, if you will. So in this case, we're not concerned about them, but it's something to bear in mind. So the problem is that when you create a user, they have to belong to at least, well, they have to have a primary group. And by default, it's going to create a new group for every user. And that's just going to cause a lot of clutter. I mean, for Windows, it has no relevance. The idea is you have a user account and you have a group. The user belongs to a group, but you don't actually end up with groups named after the user. It doesn't make sense because I mean, if I've got a user called like placeholder, it doesn't have any relevance. You know, if I've got a group then called placeholder, how do I identify the users within this group called placeholder if I'm going to go off and create a group called finance and a group called HR and a group called IT? Those sort of three groups have meaning. They have a name that makes sense. A group that's named after the individual has no relevance to Windows in particular. And what we're interested in for this video at least is Windows shares. And we want to assign permissions to shared groups, not what are effectively individual user groups. So in this particular example, because we still need a user and a group to assign permissions to, I'm just going to let this one slide, if you will. I'm going to leave this as is. I'm not too fussed in that sense, but it's just something to bear in mind is that going forward, I'm not going to be creating new primary groups for every single user. To me, it just doesn't make sense. There are no other particular options that I need to set to give this user permission. I definitely don't want to give it like sudo permissions, for example. I don't expect anybody to be using this account at all, for that matter. So there's no point giving it Samba authentication, for example. I'll explain Microsoft accounts later on, but as far as this user account goes, that's it. I don't want to give it any more permissions. But what I can do is I can actually lock the user, so that's an option. If we click on that, it just says it prevents the user from logging in or using password services. Now it says locking is only possible when disabled password is set to no. So that's something to bear in mind. But in this case, we've actually created a password. It is set to no. So I'm going to tell it to actually lock the user. So in which case, in theory, nobody can actually use this actual user account. So it should now go off and actually create a new user and then create a new user group to go with it. So there's our placeholder user. We go over to groups. We've now got a placeholder group. So now what I can actually do is go off and actually create the folder that we want to actually share out that people are going to then get access to. Now, for your typical Windows file server, I would usually be creating folders on a hard drive and then sharing the actual folders out over the network. Because the one thing I wouldn't want to do is just share an entire drive, because then what's going to happen is users are just going to see one file share available, and then they're going to have to map to that and then work their way through the individual folders. So it's better to have individual folders that you can see on the actual network, and then if you need to, you map an actual network drive to that. So it's much easier for the user if you actually give them direct access to these folders that they're going to be storing or retrieving data from. Now, in the case of TrueNAS, I do actually have an option to actually use datasets instead, and they give me more options. So if I go over to storage and then into pools, what we've got here is just our original pool, which is pool 1. So that's what I created. Now, this is just all of the data from all of the hard drives that we've got. And I don't want to just share that out. I mean, I could actually drop out to the shell and start creating individual folders and sharing those out. But datasets give me a bit more of an advantage. So what I'm going to do is go over to the ellipsis here, and then I'm going to click on Add Dataset. I'm going to give this dataset a name. Now, one thing I can't do is call it, well, I could actually call the folder or dataset homes, but the trouble is the share can't be called homes because that's an actual reserved name. So for that reason, it's going to bark at me if I do actually call it homes later down the line. So what I'm going to do is just leave it as actual home folder, or home folders, I should say, home folders. Now, for this demo, that's about as far as I can need to go. So normally I'll just click on submit at that point. But what I'm just going to explain is part of the reason why I want to have data sets is, for one thing, they're going to show up in the GUI, whereas the folders won't. If I go off and create folders in the shell, I won't see them in the GUI, particularly under there. But if I create data sets, I will. So that's quite useful. Another thing is, you've got various options here, and you can go into advanced options, and there's other things you can change, and you can set these on an actual per dataset basis. The folder is going to be inheriting stuff from the actual dataset it belongs to, whereas these datasets that we're creating, they've got their own options, so I can make changes, for example, at compression levels. So let's say, for example, I've got a lot of data that's already compressed. If I upload that to a NAS and the NAS then tries to compress it, there is the possibility that I actually end up consuming more storage space if I've already used the best algorithm that's available. In which case, if I've got a lot of data that's already compressed, I might want to upload that to somewhere where there isn't any compression. I mean, if you click on that, there's actually quite a lot of choices for different compression algorithms, including to actually turn it off. Now, in this case, all these options are just being inherited from whatever the parent data set is, in this case, the pool, but you can change them. Another thing we've got is encryption. Now, I do like this, I must admit, because I can set the encryption on a per interface, a per data set basis. The benefit of that is I don't have to encrypt everything. And the fact is I don't actually have to encrypt everything. And what I've got here is options to only do it on a per dataset basis. Because I'm going to have quite a lot of data, things like ISO files, for example, YouTube videos that I'm uploading, which I'm keeping myself in backup. I don't necessarily see any point in encrypting those because, I mean, we're dealing with public information that's already out there, for instance. There's no point in me encrypting all these YouTube videos. I mean, every time I upload a file to an encrypted NAS folder, the actual NAS has to spend some compute time to encrypt it. So it then also takes, a bit of a latency hit because it's got to take the time to do that before it can write it to the disk. So the writes are going to be slower. And then it's got to do the same thing but in reverse for when I'm actually trying to copy the data. or download the data, it's got to then decrypt it so it slows down the read process. So there's no particular reason I can see to justify encrypting literally everything. I'd rather try and make the system as efficient as I can. Now in this particular case, for that reason, the pool that I've created isn't encrypted. So it's saying here it's being encrypted as non-encrypted. Now if I want to make a change, I mean that does say is encryption's enabled basically, but it's not actually encrypted. Once I create this data set, the data itself isn't going to be encrypted because we're not using encryption of the pool. What I'd have to do is deselect that option if I wanted to, and then putting in my settings here to make sure that it does actually get encrypted. The only thing to bear in mind, that is a one-off. I've got to make the decision here and now. The other thing is that every time we then boot up this NAS, especially if you're using maybe like a passphrase, I'll have to get the actual NAS to decrypt that specific data set. So that is one downside. It would be the same as if I was encrypting the whole thing. I would have to decrypt it every time the pool gets mounted. I'd have to get it to decrypt it. There's no point in storing the encryption key on the actual NAS itself, because if somebody gets access to the NAS and it's automatically going to deselect or unencrypt the data, it's pointless. That's the risk I've got, is that I don't want somebody getting access to the drives and pulling the data off if it's unencrypted, but I also don't want anybody being able to break into the actual login account, the root account, for example, and then being able to automatically have the NAS decrypted. I don't want this thing suddenly popping up on the network either and making that information that's encrypted immediately available, because then somebody just plugs into their network. So I do want that extra security, but I want to do it on a per dataset basis. So for this example, I mean, home folders might actually make sense. It depends. I mean, for business, you might be dealing with quite a lot of sensitive information, in which case you might want to encrypt most of, if not all of your data anyway. But for a home use like me, I'm just talking about sensitive information like bank details or anything I'm storing that can identify me, that can be used against me in identity theft, for example, so that somebody can then start creating bank accounts and all sorts. But for this demo, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. So I'm just going to click on submit. So basically this data set's just going to inherit whatever this pool has, which is, LZ4 compression, for example, no encryption. Because if I go back in there, edit options, go into advanced options, you can see straight away I don't have an ability to change the encryption, for example. I don't get a choice to change the actual. There's no option to change the encryption. I can change the compression, but I can't change the encryption. So that's a one-off. So if you want to set the encryption, you're going to have to do it when you actually create the data set. It's the same for the pool. When I create the pool, I've got to make that decision there and then. Do I encrypt the entire pool or not? It's just a one-off decision. If I change my mind, I'm going to have to literally destroy this data set and rebuild it. And that time round, I'll have to encrypt it. But anyway, we've now got our data set built. Another useful feature I've got as well actually is to be able to take snapshots. So basically take a little snapshot of the actual data itself, keep a copy of that to one side. But anyway, we've now got our data set created, and the whole idea now is to actually assign permissions to decide who's going to get access to this, but also to actually share out in the first place. So I do actually have choices. I mean, I could go to the ellipsis here and then say edit permissions. And what that's for is the file system permissions for this specific data set. But I can also even set those as part of the actual setup of the share. So I'm just going to scroll down to sharing, then down to Windows shares, which you can see it uses the SMB protocol. And this is a Samba server that we're going to have running. So I'm going to click on the add button there. Now I can either type out the path of the folder or data set if I know what it is. Otherwise I can just expand this out. And I'm going to select home folders. So I don't want that actually. Now that I've selected it, it doesn't like it. So I specifically want that one, and that's what it's going to be known as. But it actually appears as something else. It's just because it's a special share basically. Default is enabled, which is what we want. But I want to set this up as a special share. I want to set this up for home shares. So what I've actually got to do is I've got to click on advanced options, and I want to be able to select that option, but it's grayed out, and it's because of this up here. By default, everything is set using the default share parameters. So I need to click on that drop down menu and change it to no presets. So it actually inherits the original default settings, but it's giving me the option now to select things. In this case, I mean, there is one other setting I want to change. I'll come back to that, but for now, I'm just going to click on that option to say use as a home share. If you click on the help menu, or help option I should say there, it'll tell you what this special share is for, and it'll also tell you this is a one-off. You can't have multiple folders or data sets set up as a home share. It would just confuse the system, so it kind of makes sense why the devs only want one. Because every time you create a user account, it's going to look here and say, oh, this is a special home share, in which case I'll set aside some room for this new user's home directory. And it's going to get confused if you've got like a lot of these different home shares, because you're going to then have to make a decision as to actually which home share is, are you going to actually use for this. So it's just too confusing. So for that reason, it makes a lot of sense why there's only one of them. Anywho, I'm going to click on submit. And then off that goes and creates the actual share. But we now need permissions. Now, bear in mind, these are file system permissions. It's dragged us basically back to storage and pools, because I could have done this if I'd gone and selected edit permissions for the data set. This is what we would have got effectively. A choice to set up either the basic permissions or to apply what is here, an access control list. And that's what we're interested in when it comes to Windows shares, is setting permissions based on these access control lists or ACLs. So for the home share service, it gets set up with these preloaded, if you will, it's like a preset ACL. If ever you actually create a share yourself, just a general one, it gives you a list of preset share options or preset ACLs, and one of them is called home, and this is what it looks like. Basically what it does is says that the owner, as in the user, has full control, their group has modify rights, and everyone has traverse rights. Now, when it talks about everyone, it's talking about, in this particular case, we're not touching directory service or anything, we're just talking about a local user account on TrueNAS. So anyone that exists within this database of users is literally part of the everyone group. So if I create a user account on a Windows computer and TrueNAS doesn't know anything about it, they don't qualify, they're not part of the everyone group. So it is a bit slightly misleading. It doesn't mean like everybody in the world or everybody connected to the network. It just means all of the user accounts that TrueNAS knows about. Now, in this case, because I'm logged in as root, and root has a primary group of wheel, it's going to assign the permissions of this user ACE, access control entry, to the root, and for the group, it's going to assign them to wheel. And I don't want that. I want to be using my own placeholder account. So I'm actually going to take that out. I mean, I do actually have options. I can click on the drop-down menu and work my way through. My new user account will be right at the end. But if I delete that root user out, I can start typing in and I'll start to filter things out. So there you go. I can now select my placeholder user. Take away the wheel one as the group, and then type in place. It'll catch up and it'll give us the choice for placeholder, because that's the only thing that matches. So that's an easy way to do it, is just delete whatever's there and just start typing basically. The only thing to bear in mind is that even though I've actually selected a user that's different and a group that's different, if I just click on lower down, there's an option to save. If I click on that, it'll actually apply these permissions to root and wheel. I've actually got to tick these boxes to get it to apply to these, this specific user and this specific group. I've got to get it to effectively overwrite what's already been set up, because when I set up that data set, it was set up with the permissions of root and wheel. So I need to overwrite all this with these user accounts here. Now, this placeholder account, I've got it locked out. I don't want it used at all. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm even going to change the permissions, and I'm going to set this to traverse for both The reason for doing that is everyone's going to get that permission anyway. Any user account that TrueNAS knows about is going to get that permission anyway. So I'm just being a bit more restrictive on what the user account can do, because the idea is what the system's going to do, it's going to create individual folders within this data set for each user. And each user is going to get assigned their own permission. So the idea is you only want them to get access. I mean, if nobody can actually use this account, it probably doesn't matter. But just to be that extra cautious, if I just set the permissions to traverse, it's a case of, well, even if somebody were to use this account, they don't have any more permissions than anybody else does for that matter. And the reason we need traverse permissions in the first place is the fact that we're going to have folders within this data set or folder. In order for somebody to get access to one of these child folders, they need to be able to traverse the parent folder first. So if somebody can't, click onto this folder to get access, they won't be able to effectively get access to the other folders. So we've got to be able to give them that option to at least have a look inside of the folder to get to the other folder. But they won't be able to create files or folders or anything in there. They'll just be able to go to that folder to get to the actual folder they want to get access to. I've got another option down at the bottom here, which is to apply permissions recursively. So what that means is you want to apply these permissions not just to the folder itself, but to every other file, folder, file in those folders, folders in those folders. You want to do it recursively. Everything that exists off this tree, if you will, underneath home folders, you'd want the same permissions applied to it. Now in our case, I mean, it actually does make a lot of sense if you're setting up these permissions afterwards. In our case, there's no data, there's nothing in there, so it doesn't really matter. So I don't necessarily have to tick it. It's not going to actually achieve anything. But if you are changing permissions, it's something to bear in mind. You will want to probably overwrite any existing permissions you've got. So that seems pretty straightforward enough. So I'll click on Save. So it's actually set up the permissions as well. So if we go back to sharing, back to Windows Shares, we've now got a share called Home Folders, or at least that's the folder as well that we're actually sharing out, although technically it's a data set. And it is enabled, so it should be visible on the network once we're actually sharing things out. Now, I do have options here, so there's like an option to edit the file system ACL. So that's what we actually did. When this share was set up, it then dragged us back to storage where we created this file system ACL. But shares also have an actual share ACL, at least in Windows they do. So the idea is there's permissions through the share, and then there's permissions at the file level. Now we've got effectively two different sharing systems going on, and it's going to start to get really complicated if you start playing around with these, because if one's more restrictive than the other, you could find yourself denying somebody access to a file who should be getting access to a file. So by default, everyone's just going to get access to that shared folder through the share, but it's then down to the file system ACL to actually decide who gets access, whether they'll be able to touch it or not, be able to change files, delete files, add files, and so on. That's all going to be decided with a file system ACL. If we start manipulating the share ACL as well, yeah, it starts to cause more problems than it's worth. So typically just leave the share ACL alone and just focus on the file system ACL. So from the sharing perspective, it's calling it an actual file system ACL. If we go back to our pool, it's just asking about permissions, but the two, they're exactly the same. So we've created our data set, we've shared it out. Technically, the only person who's got access to that folder is our placeholder. It's locked out, or at least the account's disabled. So in theory, nobody should be able to mess around with it or get access to it, which is good. Now, even if someone does re-enable that account for some reason, there's not a great deal you can do with it. You can't log in as a Samba user, for example. You won't be able to get access into the shell and change things. So I'm quite comfortable with that as a placeholder. It's just something I'll have to remember, is that that's an account I can never delete. Otherwise, I'm going to have to assign somebody else the permissions to this. Anyhow, now that we've set that up, we actually need to share it out. I mean, we're told that we're going to share it out. And by default, the actual SMB service is disabled. Now, if you create a general share, what I've noticed is once you've created that, it automatically starts this service up and it enables it to be started automatically. So we're going to have to do this manually. I'm going to tell it to start automatically. But before I turn the service on, I'm actually going to make a change to the settings. Up here is the NetBIOS name. If you want, you can change that to something else so it appears as something other than TrueNAS on the network. Entirely up to you. If you're not using the default work group in Windows, I mean, if you've got a Linux machine, that references a default work group as well when you're connecting to SMB share. So if you do have computers in a different group, then you're going to have to change that as well, especially if it's a domain controller. These sort of settings I don't want to touch because these are legacy settings. What I am interested in though is this here, bind the IP address. I want to click on that drop down menu because at the moment the service isn't bound to any specific interface, in which case it's actually listening for SMB requests on both. Now, NetBIOS can be a bit chatty to say the least, so I want to keep my network management side quite quiet. Over there, it's just Linux machines effectively. I mean, technically this is my infrastructure network, I must admit, but either way, I don't want a lot of noisy Microsoft machines over there. So for that reason, I've got a dedicated storage interface. And the idea as well would be that this would just be like maybe a 1 gig interface, whereas this would maybe like a much higher bandwidth 10 gig interface, for example. Really depends on what the physical computer is capable of. But either way, it's a bit of extra security if I bind the actual SMB service so that it's only available on that individual service. Because my intention would be that, okay, in this case, I'll be allowing Windows computers to get access to this through that specific VLAN, for example. But I'm going to have a completely separate interface for things like iSCSI, for NFS as well, because that's going to be direct computer authentication mostly, versus user authentication. So I just want the computers to be talking to the TrueNAS, for example, on a completely separate interface, away from where the users have the potential to get in access to the actual hypervisors that I've got. So in this particular case, I've only got the one data storage interface at the moment, so I'm deliberately binding the service to that interface and that service alone, that interface alone. So that's about as far as I want to go, although there are other options. So click on Save. And then what we're going to do is scroll back down, and then we're going to actually start the service. So that'll get the service up and running. And then the next thing is we need to start actually creating actual user accounts that can take advantage of this. Because at the moment, all we've done is set up a home share effectively, but we haven't actually, well, there's still nothing actually to share because there are no home accounts created. So really what I want to do is start creating a couple of users, and then we'll start seeing how we can take advantage of that home service. Well, thanks for making it to the end of this video. I really do hope you found it useful. If so, then do click the like button and share, because that encourages YouTube's algorithm to suggest it to other people who might find it useful as well. If you're new to the channel and you'd like to see more content like this, then yeah, do subscribe. Just remember to click the little bell icon though, that way you'll get notifications when I send new content out. If you've got any comments, any suggestions, if you want to leave any feedback at all, please post that in the comments section below. And if you'd like to support the channel, I've left links to both Patreon and PayPal in the description below. But above all, thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.